Hello everyone, welcome to this video series on Python Celery. This is the second video on this particular topic, and in this video we are going to talk about managing and creating Celery queues. If you are new to Celery or haven't looked into my first video, I will highly recommend you to see my first video on this particular topic. You can also see a link over here. Okay, now let's go ahead and start with a small recap of Celery. So we all know that Celery is meant for creating task queues to connect disconnected systems where task will be executed in a different system by Celery. Okay, you can see in this particular picture that how the task queue looks like. Now in this particular picture you can see only one task queue. But in reality you might want multiple task queues. Why? Because some of the things you want to do as soon as possible, and some of the things if it is delayed for a few seconds, it may not impact your software systems as much. For example, let's assume that in your software system you decided to create three queues: one for writing into database, one for writing logs, and one for giving notifications. Now, in a general sense, the highest priority queue should be something that is being written into the database. You want it to complete as soon as possible. Second priority should go to logs. And third priority should go to notification, because even if the notifications are delayed, it's fine. It is not going to impact the functionality of your software system. But if the logs are written late, you will not be able to see the dashboard clearly. And if the database writing is delayed, your application might not even work. So in all likelihood, if you are creating a production system, you will end up creating multiple queues. So let's go ahead and see the code. Now you know that Celery needs a queue, whether it is from RabbitMQ or Redis. So let me create a RabbitMQ queue. Let me run it. Should be running. And if I go ahead and see my RabbitMQ queue, it's working fine. Okay. So let me, go ahead and go to the folder where this code is. I'll go to my folder desktop presentation Celery queue. Okay. And this is my code. This is my two tasks, first task, second task, and I'm invoking the code from here using invoke task. So let me run my celery minus a cell tasks worker. That's all. My celery task is running, and if I want to execute the task, I will invoke it. You can see task invoked. Okay, and if you go ahead and see over here, first task invoked, second task invoked. So far so good. Okay, now let me create another window, and let me go to the same folder, presentation celery queue. Now by default there is a queue. We can inspect that queue by saying celery minus a cell tasks inspect active queues. You can see that by default there is a queue name celery, the default name of the queue. Okay, so what we want to do is that we want to create queues, but it has to be named queues. We have to give a name to the queue. So what we can do is that, let me stop this. Okay, clear. I will give minus q first. Okay, so now a queue name first is there. If you go ahead and see this particular queue, active queue, if you inspect active queues, you can see there is a queue name first is there. There is no by default queue name celery. Now what will happen if I invoke the task now? I can invoke the task. I can see tasks are invoked actually. Okay, tasks are actually invoked. But if I go ahead and see in my celery console, nothing is printed. Why? This is because by default when you invoke the task, it goes to the default queue which is named as celery. Now celery named queue is already created in RabbitMQ when we started our celery the first time. So things are going into that queue. But the current celery application, there is no queue name celery. It is having a queue name called first. So that's why nothing is executed. But if we go ahead and make the default queue come, you can see that the things, the tasks, first task, second task gets executed. Okay, which means when you create a named queue, nothing is considered as a default queue. Okay, it's a disadvantage because when you are putting the task into the queue, you may not know what queue you have created and what is the default queue. So there has to be one default queue. We can make the first as a default queue also. So here is how we can do that. In the code cell task, we can set a parameter called app.conf.task default queue is equal to first. If I do that and create the celery like this using a queue, named queue as first, the first queue will be considered as a default queue, and if I invoke the tasks now, these tasks should get executed. Let me run it. Yep. You can see these tasks are executed. Similarly, we can create more than one queues. Let me create a second queue, first comma second. Okay. Now we know that first queue is the default queue, and if we actually look into active queues, you can see there are two queues, first and second. Okay. Now what will happen? By default, if we invoke the task, it will go to the first queue, right? And the task will be executed. You can see tasks are executed. But we can make sure from the code that one of the tasks should go to different queue, second. Okay. Now if I execute this, tasks are invoked, and you can see that second task is actually invoked this time, but it is going to a different queue called second, and it is being picked from there. And that's why you can create multiple queues. Okay. Now to give a queue parameter, you can see you need to provide apply async. You cannot give a queue parameter with delay. Okay, that's one limitation. If you want to specify queue, use apply async. Now this is a limitation. You may want, but most of the time may not want the clients to decide which queue some things should go. You want queues to be decided at the celery level. Okay, so this you can do. Let me get rid of this second parameter over here. This you can do by giving a parameter in the task called queue equal to first, queue equal to second. Okay, now what will happen is that by default, first task, whenever it is executed or triggered from the client, it will go to the first queue, second task will go to the second queue. Okay, let me close it and run it once again by creating two queues, first and second, and let me invoke the tasks. Tasks are invoked, and these tasks are executed. Okay. And if you go ahead and see your queues in the RabbitMQ, you can see first, second queue as well as celery queue. All the queues will be there. So this is how you create multiple queues in Celery. And in all production system, I do believe that you will get into the situation where you will end up creating different queues for different types of jobs. So make sure that in the beginning itself, you decide how many queues you want to create, or at least give a provision to implement multiple queues. I do hope and believe that this video was helpful to all of you. Thank you all. Thanks for watching. We will meet again. Until the next time we meet, good day, goodbye. You take care.